The story began with a magical sphere hovering in the sky, emitting energy. The main character lies on the edge of a cliff, next to whom stand two men, one of whom said that in his next life he should try to keep his eyes open. He messed with the wrong people. This man pushed the protagonist off the cliff. Yu Wu, in the air, used magic, and in an instant a powerful charge of energy appeared. The magical wave reached the bell, which was located nearby in the cultivator's monastery. Inside the room, the curator, standing near a crowd of people and a golden statue, congratulated the master on his successful breakthrough. The Tower of Seals. The cultivators said that they would not dare, they would return to the tower and wait. Brashov Dark Gothic Castle. Gulid, sitting on the throne inside the castle, thought that thousands of years had passed. Someone had broken through again among these Easterners. He told his fighters with a serious face to urgently gather all the nobility. From today onwards, let them do their utmost to settle the matter with the werewolves without hesitation. Let them gather all their strength to protect their territory. They can't allow a tragedy like that of thousands of years ago to happen. Some time later, in the Western monastery, the nuns said for God to give them strength. At this time, the protagonist built a tall foundation and smiled. The teacher called out to him and said that he had calculated. This time, his seclusion to build the foundation might take 2,000 years. He doesn't believe that he is that weak, but he still decided to warn him just in case. If it really takes 2,000 years, then the magical era might end by then. In that case, the energy of the world will be greatly weakened. He just hopes that he can survive in this chaos. Yu thought with an excited face, has it really been 2,000 years already? He said, indeed, the spiritual energy here is much weaker than before his seclusion. The protagonist thought that his solitude had only lasted 2 days. How could 2,000 years have passed outside? He had to check it out to be absolutely sure. Yu flew to the side when he suddenly saw two men on the edge of a cliff. He flew up to them and asked, "Who are they? How dare they cause trouble on his sex territory?" The two men took out their guns and started shooting at the protagonist. Yu stopped the bullets with magic and thought that the two of them did not have cultivation, but the weapons in their hands were not from his time. It seemed that 2,000 years had really passed, in which case he would find out the state of this world from them. Yu fired 2 magic projectiles at the men, and they died instantly. The protagonist, perplexed, looking at the lifeless bodies, asked, "Are mortals really that weak after 2,000 years?" He flew up to the man lying on the ground and said that this boy was 2,000 years ago. Such a scratch would not have been considered even a small injury. He didn't think that it was possible to die from something like this. Suddenly, a phone rang next to the man's body. The protagonist asked in surprise, what kind of device was this? Suddenly, Shiru's loud voice came from the phone, and she said that she would never marry a country bumpkin like him. Yu asked excitedly, she doesn't have any spiritual energy, but she can transmit sound across thousands of kilometers? The one who created this device must be a top expert. Since 2,000 years have passed, there must be numerous dangers here. If he wants to survive, then he should take a new form. Yu walked to the man's corpse, used magic, and instantly took on his appearance. He said since they seemed destined to meet, he will give him a decent burial and borrow his appearance. If he has enemies, he will avenge them as long as it does not cause any complications. At this time, in Haizhou University City, on a commercial street, Xiaoru, who was inside, asked aggressively, why should she marry this old man's grandson just because he saved her parents? Qianqian, holding a drink in her hand, told her not to be angry. As long as she was in Haizhou, her parents couldn't influence her. Xiaoru said excitedly that she didn't understand, this engagement was in honor of her grandfather, who had been seriously ill for the past year. Then Master Yu said that it was because of karma, and her grandfather remembered the events from the past. Now, her entire family was pressuring her to marry Yi Wu, or they would turn their backs on her. Once she brought the miracle doctor Old Shui here to cure her grandfather, they wouldn't force her anymore. She was a student in Haizhou, how could a country bumpkin deserve her? The main character, floating in the air on a big sword, thought that this kid has the same name as him, and he is from the Haizhou University sect? To understand today's world, the best way is to blend into it. In that case, he will take on his identity and join a cult to learn more. Suddenly, a plane appeared on his way and almost shot down Yu Wu. The girl sitting in the car called out to her mother and said there was a flying man in the air. Her mother said she thought such things were stupid because she played fantasy games too much. Let her go home and complete 10 sets of tasks, and she will be fine again. The protagonist nervously asked why this flying boat didn't emit spiritual energy. He felt like there were still a lot of powerful people, he should be more careful. Suddenly, he flew into the window of a large skyscraper and slowly began to fall. The man inside the building nervously asked who was making that noise. The girl asked with a displeased face why he didn't say that the windows would be cleaned today. Yu fell to the ground and said, "It's irresponsible, so high." 1 hour later, he saw a predatory face and was very scared. Suddenly the girl took off the animal mask and asked, "Is he lying on the ground because he has no money?" The protagonist said in confusion, "No." Yin said with a surprised face, she saw that he had been lying here for a long time. "Is he hungry right now?" Her mother says, "When people are hungry, they do not move." Yu stood up and thanked her for her concern. He said that he was just a little tired and wanted to rest here. The protagonist thought to himself, this child has no spiritual energy, so she is just an ordinary person. Flying such a short distance used up all his strength. Apparently, until he reaches the nascent soul stage, he should follow his teacher's advice and keep a low profile. He sat down on the bench next to the girl and looked at the sky. Suddenly Yin said that his things are so shabby, he probably has nothing to eat. She handed him a bag of chips and said, he should eat well to have strength. Yu patted her head and asked with a smile, "How about they eat together?" He ate one chip and thought, this world is so chaotic that mortals even need clothes. Some women's pants are so short, it seems like they don't have enough fabric. But even so, the children are still peaceful. And although life is hard, people have not changed. Suddenly, the girl's mother called out to her and told her to come to her. Yin jumped off the bench and the protagonist, holding out his hands, told her to be careful. Suddenly Hugh grabbed him and told him to take his hands off her. He twisted the protagonist and pushed his face into the bench. Yu with a nervous face said that it was unfair to attack someone so suddenly. He threw him back and Hugh shouted at him to fight again. Suddenly, the mother shouted loudly for them to stop. She asked the man why he started fighting so quickly. The mother patted Yin on the head and asked what they were doing with the protagonist. She said that she saw him lying there and asked if he wanted some food. Then she took the chips she bought and shared them with him. The mother ordered Hugh to go and apologize. The man bowed his head to the protagonist and said that he thought he was trying to kidnap their young lady. Yu said that it was okay, he understood. The mother handed him an envelope, thanked him and said that it was a small gift as a token of her gratitude. The protagonist approached Yin and told her with a smile to remember to eat well. Feeling her hand, he thought that she was so small and already had some strange diseases, but it was not difficult to fix. Yu took out some medicine from his pocket and whispered in her ear that it was a candy. If she felt bad, let her eat this item. They got into the car and Hugh looked in the rearview mirror and said that they had an appointment with Miracle Dr. Shui. If they went now, it might work out. And also, let her look at the pill in Yin's hands. Mother ordered her to throw this item away. She, holding the pill close to herself, asked if she could play with this item for a little while and then throw it away. Mother approved of her suggestion with a smile and thought that her illness would not last long. She hopes that the wonderful Dr. Shui will help them and perform a miracle. Suddenly Yin turned pale and began to lose consciousness. Mother excitedly shouted for Hugh to hurry up and get them to the doctor right away. Some time later, at Dr. Shui's house. Dr. Shui, divine hands. Suddenly, Yin's mother ran into the room, holding Yin in her arms, shouting for him to save her daughter. He laid the girl down and told her not to panic, because it was his duty to treat illnesses. Now let her allow him to examine her daughter. Shui felt Yin's pulse and, sighing, apologized and said that there was nothing he could do. Let her please prepare for the worst. Wang, with tears in her eyes, fell to her knees and shouted that he had to save Yin. Let him cure her, even at the cost of her life. She was ready. Shui said that the only thing he could do now was to ease her suffering. He hugged her and said that only the 9-turning restorative pill, a 2,000-year-old divine medicine, could save Yin. Unfortunately, the recipe for this pill had long been lost. And although he had half a fragment of the recipe, he could not restore it completely. Suddenly, he smelled a familiar smell and noticed the pill in Yin's hand. Shui took the item in his hand and thought, this smell and shape are just like the prescription. Could this be the medicine? Wang asked in surprise, why is this pill still here? Ever since she saw the protagonist and gave him money. He gave the pill to Yin, saying that this item could help her health. Shui said in surprise, this pill is the 9 turns restorative pill. She asked excitedly, does this mean that Yin can be saved? The doctor raised his hands up and happily thought, who else can boast of such a thing? The young man who gave this pill is not poor or destitute at all. Perhaps he is a divine being who has come down to get acquainted with human life. They should make friends with him. Shue stuffed the pill into Yin's mouth and said that she would recover after a little rest. Wan happily thanked him. The doctor said that she should not thank him. She should thank the person who gave her this pill. Could she take him to him? If he could listen to this young man's teachings, he would die without regrets. Wan said thoughtfully, she didn't know this person. She thought that the protagonist must have realized that Yin was sick, so he gave her the pill. She wanted to throw the item away, but by doing so, she would not only disappoint him, but also, in theory, kill Yin. Hugh said that they met him at Haizhou University. He was in his early 20s and was currently starting the school year. Perhaps the protagonist was currently at that very university. Wan happily shouted for him to hurry up and take them to Haizhou. He saved Yin's life. The Wang family should repay his kindness. Shue, watching this, thought that it seemed like this was really a saint who tasted human life and came down to earth to become a student. He must help him keep his identity a secret. And what if the protagonist turns out to be generous? Wang thought that a guy who can easily give a premium pill can't be ordinary. Their family needs to strengthen this relationship. After some time, the protagonist walks through the city with a package. He thought that ever since the unknown person called once before, this long-range communicator has been silent. Suddenly the phone rang and Yi Wu wondered if it was calling again. He wondered why this was happening. A woman's voice came from the phone, asking if he had arrived in Haizhou. The protagonist burst into tears and wondered what that voice was. Yi Wu told her not to worry, he would arrive for dinner on time. He wondered why that aunt sounded like his teacher's wife. First, he met the guy who was being stalked with his name, and then another woman with a voice like the teacher's wife. Is this just a coincidence, or is there something more going on behind the scenes? Before leaving, his teacher left him some things that are kept in Wan Bao Lu's property. Maybe the things inside can help him find out the answers. But first, he has to go and find Auntie Zhou. After a while, Jiang Yinwu's mountain villa. Qian Qian asked why Shiru was so sad. She told her not to judge a book by its cover, she was not that frivolous. Qian Qian asked with a smile, only a person of Xiong's caliber is worthy of her, right? Shiru angrily shouted that this man was a student of the Presidential Council of Hyde University, and the best jock in the school every year. How dare she compare this guy with Xiong? Suddenly, the protagonist's voice rang out and asked if Auntie Zhou was home. Shiru said in surprise, what a cute voice, he is a handsome guy. They hid in the bushes and she said that this guy is really handsome enough, but he is dressed very boringly, so she still likes Xiong. Qianqian said the bodyguards will go after Zhou now, for now, the two of them are left here. What should they do if this country bumpkin takes this opportunity to do something to them? Shiru asked, why don't they summon the Lion King? Qianqian said that's a bad idea. The Lion King is too aggressive, what if he hurts him? She said the Lion King will just scare him. At least they can be safe, right? Qianqian agreed and shouted for the Lion King to come out. Shiru asked excitedly, the Lion King will just scare him, right? She said with a confident smile, the Lion King was the champion of the National Tibetan Mastiff competition last year. A dog ran out to the protagonist, he petted it and said with a smile, he thought there were mountain gods and demons here, but it turned out to be just a dog. Suddenly, Aunt Zhou called out to him from behind. Yuwu looked at her and asked in surprise, is she the teacher's wife? She asked, what kind of address is that? Just like when he was a child, let him just call her Aunt Zhou. The protagonist smiled, watching Shiru hug his aunt, thinking that not only did she have the same voice, but she also had the same appearance as the teacher's wife. The aunt asked, why is she so energetic? Shiru, sticking out her tongue at the protagonist with a smirk, said, that guy intruded and scared the Lion King, he is so annoying. The aunt lightly hit her on the head and asked, why is she so rude? When she was little, she followed him everywhere and called his name, but now she doesn't even recognize him. When she was little, she played homebody and cried, saying that she was going to marry Yi Wu when she grows up. Auntie started to walk away and said with a smile that she had some things to do, so let her show him the house. The protagonist said with a smile that it was nice to meet her. Xiaoru started to walk away and nervously told him not to come near her. If it weren't for her mother, she would have forgotten about him altogether. He thought that Auntie Zhou's every smile and look was just like his master's wife. She reminded him of his master's wife, who was more than family to him. In that case, He would treat them like his family 2,000 years ago. He stepped through the gate and felt a powerful surge of energy. Formation of the Yin Blood-Bone Demon. Yu thought that, judging by the state, it was almost 18 years ago. By taking away the power of his master's family, someone wants to destroy their entire lineage. But alas, the person who started the formation doesn't even know the basics. But even if it was the same group as 2,000 years ago, they won't be a problem. Shioru asked with a dissatisfied face, considering what kind of village he lives in. Is it hard for him to believe his eyes from what he saw? Yu Wu agreed and said with surprise that it was unbelievable. She said now she will tell him. This place was the largest abandoned building in Haizhou. 18 years ago, her grandfather found Master Shui, who changed the earth energy in this place. Later, Haizhou's economy began to develop, and this place became the main residence of the rich. The protagonist asked with surprise, is Shui strong? Shioru said that she did not believe in him, but Shui was very popular in the world of inner metaphysics. And a little later, her grandfather suddenly fell seriously ill, but Master Shui saved him. Yu thought with a serious face that 18 years ago, changed the earth energy, and then saved Mr. Yang. This is a little suspicious. Even if this Shui is not a criminal genius, he is involved in this. He must keep him in sight. Shioru called out to him and said that they didn't have to dwell on it. She pointed to the corridor of the manor, and suddenly a guard ran out and called out to them. Shioru said displeasedly that he shouldn't call him master. He said that dinner was ready, Joe was waiting for them. The protagonist thought with a smile that maybe things would get better with time. After all, his teacher's wife was so gentle. That's why he should be kinder to them. Some time later, after dinner, Shioru buried her face in the bed and said that she was really tired. This country bumpkin was such a schemer, he flattered her mother at the dinner table. Does he have any ulterior motives? Her mother even let him stay in the house. Qiangqian, playing with the dog, told her to just stay at the university and not come home. If she was afraid that Andy would find her, she could join Professor Wang's research team. Did he invite her to this event? Shioru agreed and said that she would call him later and join his research team once school started. She would be gone for about half a year. Then she would assign the servants a vacation and leave the protagonist alone in the house. Qianqian said with a smile, this is cruel. The maintenance of the villa costs hundreds of thousands of dollars per month. Where will the protagonist find that much money? Shioru said that if he could go to the construction site to carry bricks and clean up trash, then he should be able to scrape together enough money to keep from starving to death. At this time, there was a car parked outside the house, and the protagonist and Auntie were standing next to the car. He handed her an item with a smile on his face, and said that this was a family pill. This item had healing properties and would be good for Grandpa Yang. He thought that given his current personality, if he just told her to take it, he might scare her. He needed to wait a little longer. The auntie said with a smile, how wonderful that he has such a kind heart. He opened the door for her and thought that now she is helping him, and he has a legitimate identity. He will rest for one day, and tomorrow he will go to Haizhou University. After the car left, the protagonist felt the presence of strangers. At this time, the bandits were jumping on the trees, and one of them said that right in front of them is Yiwu's villa, and this child is here too. This time they must kill this guy. Revenge is the least of their worries. If the higher-ups blame them, so be it. They saw Yiwu and jumped to the ground, starting to attack him. The bandit said menacingly that he has the nerve to kill someone on his territory in Haizhou. Let him look at his small white face, he doesn't look like an adult. He will give him two choices, either he kneels down and kills himself, or they do. The protagonist used a magic technique and disappeared in an instant. The fighter said excitedly, something strange happened, he just disappeared. The head bandit said with a confident smile, whoever killed his two best men must be strong enough, that's interesting. Let them split up and look for him, he should be nearby. He thought with a serious face, this kind of disappearance was a little strange. If he could learn this technique, his strength and status would skyrocket. He thinks he needs to use his secret weapon. He can find him even if he ran to the ends of the earth. The head bandit looked at his device and saw that the arrow was pointing at him. Suddenly, the protagonist appeared behind him and hit him with a brick. After a while, he woke up and Yiwu asked, where are they from and why are they hunting him? The head bandit looked at the other fighters tied up nearby, scared, and asked, were they caught too? One of them said excitedly, they didn't even have time to understand anything. The bandit boss thought that this kid's skills were higher than those of martial artists, but that other guy was also terrifying. He shouted that it was better to keep this a secret forever. In an instant, all the bandits had blood pouring out of their mouths. The protagonist wondered if this was a suicide by poison? Were these people truly well-trained killers? What kind of people did the owner of this body anger to attract such a squad of assassins? It seems he needs to train more. This criminal genius is not an easy one. If he can become a student of Haizhou University, he will be able to understand this era more accurately. At this time, the gang boss said that there is still no news from the black group. Let the worker quickly check where they are now. Another fighter looked at the monitor and said that the life signs of 5 members of the black group have disappeared. The captain asked with a serious voice, "Are they all dead?" The fighter said that this is according to the information sent by the drone. There are traces of a struggle where the black group disappeared, but no other signs were found at that place. The captain aggressively created a volley of magical energy and shouted that they are a bunch of idiots. Let him send someone suitable, let them make a mess. After a while, the protagonist got off the bus and thought to himself, did he really think that with his current foundation, he could at least protect himself in the mortal world? He didn't think that the mortal weapons were so terrifying now. It seemed like he should keep himself a secret for a while, otherwise, he didn't know what kind of trouble could happen to him. If he angered those iron piles and those iron snakes, he wouldn't have a chance to survive. Suddenly, the man who was next to the protagonist felt sick and fell to the ground. The women standing nearby shouted at him to get out of here and not touch that crook. Let him be careful that he wasn't tricked by that old man. Yuwu looked at them and thought, is everyone in this world so cold and heartless? The teacher often said that when he walked in the mortal world, if he didn't see any injustice, he should do his duty. He was extremely lucky to meet him. Yuwu put a pill in the man's mouth and, smiling, passed by the woman, told her to be kinder to others. After some time, another man ran up to the lying man and asked how he felt. He woke up and asked that he clearly felt an attack right now. How did he feel better? Exactly, being on the verge of fainting, the young man gave him a pill, and when he woke up, it was as if he had never been sick. Although the benefactor did not reveal his name, they must repay him. Let him send people right away and let them make every effort to find him. After some time, Haizhou University. Sitting inside the office, Xiaoru said that this is a very beautiful campus. Finally, she was able to escape from this country bumpkin. Qianqian with a tired face agreed and said that here her mother would not be able to insist on marrying this collective farmer. She heard that a new student transferred in today. She hoped he was handsome. Xiaoru said with a dissatisfied face that she always only thought about guys. The teacher came into the classroom and said that they had to greet the new classmate. Qianqian said in surprise that the new guy was really good looking. Xiaoru said that he had a good figure, but he looked very familiar. It couldn't be, it must be just a coincidence. How could such an ignoramus transfer here? Qianqian said quietly that this guy didn't even know where Guanqiao was. He couldn't find the place. The teacher asked why he didn't introduce himself. The male lead greeted the class and said that his name was Beichen. He thought that it would be best not to use his real name for the new place. Qianqian asked in a whisper if she still loved her senior. How about giving this one to her? Xiaoru whispered that she likes guys who remain cool and don't talk much. The teacher said that his introduction was very fast. She would see where he could sit. Xiaoru thought that she had done it. And although they both have the same last name, his name sounds much better. Suddenly, Qianqian stretched out her hand and started shouting that there was an empty seat next to her. The teacher asked what Xiaoru thought about it. Or should they ask that lady who was hiding for her opinion? She smiled and said that she would like to sit with him too. Suddenly, the protagonist confidently walked up to another girl and asked if he could sit next to her. She gave her permission with surprise. At the back of the class, a man said that he thought Xiaoru was interested in a new guy. Could he live with it? The man agreed and said that it upset him. He imagined what Shan thought about it. After a while, the bell rang and all the students went out into the hallway. Suddenly, the protagonist was pushed by his second friend and asked his name. His friend asked if he had heard of Shan from Haizhou University. Shan walked up to him and told him to stay away from Xiaoru with an angry face. Yuwu thought that he had better not make trouble on the first day. It seems that he is protecting this girl, is that not bad? He started to walk away and said with a smile, he promises that he will not even look at her. He will definitely stand thousands of kilometers away from her wherever she is. Even if he sees her, he will just walk around. Once behind them, he started to cast a spell and thought that this guy was a little impudent. Half of his strength should be enough, right? He cast a magic spell and set Shan's hair on fire. His friends screamed in fear that his hair was on fire. After a while, the protagonist came outside and said that half of his strength was enough. What's the point of appearing strong without cultivation? Speaking of which, where is the library? He should go there and check. To understand an era, he must read the books of that era. After some time, Xiaoru and Qianqian are walking down the street. She said that she invited him so warmly, but he chose the seat next to Ting. Is she really that bad? Xiaoru said that he probably just has no taste. She's 100 times better than Ting. They saw the protagonist and Qianqian said in surprise that he was walking straight towards them. Does he want to talk to them? But he just rejected her, he can't go to her. Does he really want to talk to her? Yue walked up to them, when suddenly some bird poop fell on his shoe. He got down on one knee and started cleaning the dirt off his shoe. Qianqian said with a smile that he got down on one knee. He wants to confess his love to Xiaoru, it's very romantic. She started to run away in fear and shouted that she was still too young and didn't want to date him yet. Qianqian ran after her in surprise. The protagonist, perplexed, looked at his finger and asked, confess what? He doesn't even have a flower, he's a stupid bird poop. After a while, Shan shouted with an aggressive look that the protagonist had begged for mercy in front of him, and now he was hitting on Xiaoru? He would definitely kill him, and would not even spare him. One person said that this guy had gone to the library. However, it was busy there, so it would be difficult to get close to him. Shan said that they did not need to hurry. After all, it took time to draw knives. Another person asked, addressing him with respect, what his plans were. He said, angry, that he would simply castrate him. After all, that way he would not pester his goddess anymore. After a while, in the library, Wu was carefully studying a book. He thought that the cultivation methods after 2,000 years were so complicated, he could not understand the content of the texts. One girl said, pointing her index finger at him, that they should pay attention to how this fool was studying pinyin. The guy said, laughing, that he had already been watching this for 10 minutes. He thought, paying attention to this, that these letters on the door were so familiar, because they had an ancient aura. Perhaps there were Yuan Yin and Huaxing level cultivation methods in there. The girl shouted, jumping up from her seat, that he was going to the ancient documents archive. The guy asked, laughing, this fool can't even do pinyin, and he wants to read ancient letters? Professor Wang said loudly, entering the library, that it was noisy there now. After all, this was a library, not a meeting room, so they should be quieter. The guard jumped up and stood next to him, addressing him politely. He asked, addressing him politely, did he need any books today? He said that he didn't need to worry. Because he had a project tomorrow, so he needed to find some ancient documents. He asked, who was already there? He said, apologizing, that he had gone to the toilet just now and had not watched the door. He said, walking there importantly, that he didn't need to worry. Because he would catch the intruder, no matter who it was. He thought while studying the ancient documents that it was an interesting book. After all, it was the beginning book of a type of fist fighting. Although it was an unfinished technique and had some damage. The guard shouted loudly, angry and rudely addressed him, that this was an archive of ancient documents. Therefore, outsiders were forbidden to be there, and he needed to get out of there immediately. He grabbed his shoulder. He asked with an innocent face, why couldn't he just read there? He asked, was he smart enough to read ancient writings? After all, even Professor Wang didn't fully understand them, and he dared to act so arrogantly there? Wang said in a reserved manner that the ancient documents were very valuable, so he needed to put them back carefully so as not to damage them. He said in a formal manner that he would kick him out of there right now. He said that he shouldn't be so hasty. He thought that this guy looked very familiar. Could this be his benefactor? He said, formally addressing him, that he should not waste his time on this student. Therefore, he would throw him out of there and teach him a good lesson. Wang said, angry, that he had to apologize to this benefactor now. Although even he would call him his young friend. He asked in surprise, why should he apologize? He thought, did he offend someone influential? After all, he wanted to win the professor over, but now his plans were ruined. One student said, addressing the professor, that this guy cannot understand pinyin, so he went there just to make trouble there. After all, he broke the rules, why shouldn't he be punished? Another student said that if he was a professor, he could not allow exceptions to the rules for someone. He thought, these students really like to make a lot of noise there. However, this was a great opportunity for him to find out whether his benefactor could understand ancient script. He thought nervously, did he break the rule of the local sect? If he does not solve it, will he be punished in this case? He asked, turning to the younger generation, could he not prove his skills to others? He thought that he could not be punished so quickly, after all, he had just entered there. Because he did not want to disgrace himself. He said, looking at the book, that right foot forward, turn around and step, left lunge, step back, lift the heel, turn left and point the toe, right foot forward. The professor asked, looking at him in shock, how could this be? He said, reading the text in the book, that you need to turn around, step, right lunge, step back and lift the heel, turn right and point the toe, right foot forward, turn around and step, left lunge. He thought it was very incredible, because every word of his benefactor corresponded to his research. And this text is not finished, but he even restored the missing parts. One student asked, did he really read this? And was he absolutely right? Another student said that judging by the professor's expression, this student really did read everything correctly. Wu asked, looking surprised, is he okay? He accepted his help and assured that he really was okay. He thought that this professor looked so familiar. Is this really the same one from the street? If you think about it logically, after taking the pill, mortals become stronger than an elephant. So how could he lose consciousness? He thought, with a changed face, that he was simply lying to him. So he was trying to deceive him in order to get the pills. He shouted, running out of the library, that he had urgent business, so he had to leave there. He thought, was his benefactor disappearing like the wind again? He asked what book he took. Let him check it for him. The guard said that everything will be done now. After a while, he said, handing it to him, that he found the book. He asked, isn't this? Learn Pinyin with me. He thought that his benefactor was a student there, which meant that he must have deep intentions to take such a simple book. So he would take it to study. At this time, Shan and his friends were waiting for the protagonist at the exit of the library. One said that he was already coming. Shan said that they should follow him. Wu thought, why did they come there? And there was even a second group? He thought with a smile that this was very good, because they could play. A couple of hours later, at the Yanhua villa at the main entrance, the protagonist asked, turning around, they had been following him for so long, maybe it was time for them to take a break already? One of Shan's friends asked in surprise, have they already been exposed? Shan asked, drawing out his weapon, then what are they waiting for? After all, this is the perfect time to castrate him. Suddenly an unknown person appeared behind him. Shan turned around in shock, noticing that they were about to hit him at the last moment. He was kicked to the side. The protagonist was surrounded by assassins, and one shouted that they needed to attack and get the thing back. He thought, who are they? They had been chasing him since he left the academy. Apparently it would never end. One said that he needed to get the thing back if he didn't want to die. He asked, what thing are we talking about? Another asked irritably, was he still pretending? The first shouted that they should just beat him until he told them the truth. They should just take him down. He said that they were annoying bugs. He said, dodging the blow, that they liked to play. However, the last thing he needed was idiots who would come to him themselves. One of the assassins shouted that this kid was trying to get away, they needed to chase him. The protagonist wanted to object, but remained silent. Suddenly, all the assassins were grabbed by chains, and one of them shouted that they had been deceived. Another shouted that he was asking to let him go, because he didn't want to die. He said using his ability that the person behind Yunwu Villa had created an evil formation. Perhaps he was waiting for his master's family to die there. So before, he was worried about how he could break that formation. However, they themselves came there today, so he would use them for a good cause. He used his technique to break the evil formation there. At this time, the unknown master was injured, and he asked, did someone break his formation? He shouted that he needed to go to him there immediately. Alone approached, addressing his teacher with respect. He said, addressing Alone, that he needed to go to Haizhou immediately and see what happened there. He said that he understood his order, and it would be carried out. Some time later, at the Yunwu villa, the man asked, did this guy burn all the bodies of his people so as not to leave a trace? He said, cursing, that he should ask his superiors to send a special team to kill him. After all, no matter who he is, and no matter what his silhouette, if he dared to compete with them, then he must die. Some time later, on the streets of the city, the protagonist asked why he was sneezing there. Was someone handsome thinking about him? Zhang Jiwen pretended to bump into the protagonist to steal his wallet. He looked at him, who was lying on the ground with a puzzled expression. Jiwen stood up and ran away from there. The protagonist looked at him with a puzzled expression. He asked in surprise why were his pants cut. So it was a thief. After a while, Jiwen checked the contents of the wallet and said in disappointment that it was a waste of time because it was empty. After a while, in the men's socializing room of Haizhou University, the protagonist knocked on the door. Jiwen asked, "Who is it?" He opened the door and became nervous when he saw him. Wu thought that he seemed like the same person. "Is it really him who stole his wallet?" he asked. "How can he help him?" Jiwen thought that was great. After all, it was his neighbor. So he would just pretend that he didn't know anything. After all, he would have to live with him. Wu said with a smile, greeting him and introducing himself as a second-year philosophy major who was assigned to this dorm. Jiwen greeted him with a handshake and introduced himself with a smile, thinking that it was such a shame on his head that he robbed his roommate. So he was very ashamed of it, and he should pay him. He invited him to come inside. Wu thought as he walked inside the room, "Is this what a dorm room looks like in the 21st century? That was quite interesting." Jiwen asked with a smile and a brotherly manner if he could treat him to a dinner to celebrate their acquaintance. Wu asked what kind of dinner he was talking about. He said it was just an evening snack. After a while, they were sitting at a table. Jiwen said with a smile that there was nothing special to order here, so they would have whatever was offered to them for dinner. Ting said as she brought the order that their meat was ready. Wu stared at her in surprise. She asked in surprise, "Isn't he the new one in their group?" He asked why he was there so late. Ting said that she was working part-time. Suddenly, the customers shouted loudly to the staff, why their fish wasn't ready yet. Ting said that she apologized to them, but the fish was still being cooked, and this dish would be ready very soon. Zhang Wu said, speaking rudely to her, that time is money, and she was making him wait for a very long time. He asked if she wanted to make some compensation. Ting said, bowing, that she was asking for his forgiveness. He said, smirking, that it was useless to ask for forgiveness, because he wanted compensation. She tried to say something, but she couldn't. Zhang Wu said that he thought she looked good, so how about going to the hotel with him as compensation? Ting politely asked him not to offer her such a thing. He asked, standing up from his chair, why she didn't look at his face. Zhang Wu asked, grabbing her hand with his, let her ask on the street if there are anyone who doesn't know his name. Why does she dare to refuse him? Does she really want to die? Ting said in fear that she was asking him to let her go politely. Zhang Wu said that she shouldn't break down and that they would go to a nearby hotel already. The protagonist rudely called him and hit his hand so that he would let her go. Zhang Wu asked, angry and cursing, who is he? How dare he interfere in his business? The other shouted, grabbing a bottle, that if he didn't want to die, then he'd better get away from there as far as possible. Jiwen called out to the protagonist, but he asked, looking at her angrily, she's his classmate, how can he just sit and watch? It's better for the two of them to step back and just watch, and most importantly, not get blood on their faces. Zhang Wu said, pointing his index finger at him, that he was asking for trouble himself, so they needed to deal with him. His henchmen shouted in agreement, and followed the order. Jiwen thought that he couldn't allow himself to be beaten now, so he should quickly call the police. One shouted as he attacked him, saying that he should die. He swung a bottle, intending to hit him on the head, but the protagonist dodged and dealt a series of quick blows to them. Jiwen asked, looking at him in surprise, what just happened? Could he really defeat everyone? Ting asked, covering her mouth with her hands in surprise, does he really know martial arts? Zhang Wu said in anger, that was simply impossible. Wu asked, holding one opponent, is that all they can do? Zhang Wu shouted, he had seen worse in his life, so he was not easily frightened by such a thing. He shouted as he attacked him with a weapon in his hands, saying that he deserved to die. The protagonist calmly grabbed the tip of the knife blade. Zhang Wu said, falling to his knees, that he was apologizing to him, because he was wrong. Ting said that she was grateful to him for helping her. After all, if it weren't for him, she wouldn't know what to do. He said with a smile that they were all classmates, so she didn't need to be so polite. Jiwen said, addressing him in a brotherly manner, that he was so good at martial arts, and he thought he was charming. Wu asked when she was leaving for home. It was already late outside. She asked if he could walk her home. She was really scared to go alone now. Wu said, holding her hand, that they could go together. After a while, not far from her house, the protagonist asked her by name why she was working late. Ting said with a heavy sigh that her mother was sick and needed a lot of medicine, so she wanted to study and work part-time. However, she didn't expect a situation like the one in the restaurant to arise. He thought that she was very weak and he should help her in the future. He looked around seriously, feeling something strange there. Ting asked why he stopped. He said that it was nothing, and he was just distracted. Wu thought, why did he feel a fleeting aura there? It was quite strange. Ting said with a smile that they had already arrived, so he should go home himself and rest. He said that she was right, but first she should go home first. Ting said that it was fine and said goodbye to him. He thought that that aura had appeared again. Could it be spiritual energy? After all, spiritual energy is very weak in the 21st century. However, there is plenty of it there. Is there something wrong with this place? In any case, he should stay there and investigate. He noticed that flew past. He said that this is what he needs. Some time later, in the university toilet, Shan hid with his friends, holding a bag in his hand. He said, cursing, that he finally found it. After all, last time he lost to the people, so now he must take revenge on him. They threw the bag at the protagonist, and he shouted that it was time to end this. One of the friends swung a bat. After a while, dull thuds and cries of pain were heard in the school bathhouse. One person asked what was going on there. Another said that loud screams were coming from there. Shan said that he was apologizing because he was wrong. If he would be so kind, let him forgive them. Wu asked, did they think they would be forgiven just by kneeling? Was it really that easy, in their opinion? He asked, then what did he want in return? He began to flex his fists threateningly. He asked fearfully, how much did he want? Let him name his price. Perhaps 100 would do? He asked, slapping him angrily. Did he consider him a beggar? He asked, perhaps he wanted 1,000 then? He asked, hitting him on the head, was he really worth so little? He said fearfully, that he understood everything, let him stop hitting him. Just 1,000 was not enough for him, was it? He said, looking threateningly, that he would take 10,000. He asked in surprise, was it really that much? After a while, they left the school bathhouse. He asked why people still used wallets. He was curious, was 100,000 enough to rent a house there? They said, bowing to him, that he should take care of himself. One of the friends, Shan, said, addressing him as the main one, that they were just being bullied. Would they just tolerate it? Shan said that a smart person does not look for trouble. So they should not tell anyone what happened there today. The other one said that he agreed with him. He said that first let them treat their wounds, and then decide how to deal with him. After a while, the bell rang. Teacher Q said, addressing the class, that they had a new lesson there today. The protagonist asked, addressing Ting, if her family was looking for tenants. She asked, how did he know about it? He said that he saw the notice on her door then. He asked with an awkward smile if she would mind if he rented a house there. She asked in surprise if he really wanted that. He said that of course he did, he already had the money to pay. She shouted, throwing chalk at him, what was he mumbling about during class? Did he not respect her at all? He said with a smile, pressing his hand to his forehead and addressing the teacher, that her health was not in order, because her yin and yang were not balanced, so she needed to take medicine to regulate them. She asked in annoyance why he said that. He said with a sigh that he meant she needed professional help. She shouted that he needed to shut up, because she would not tolerate poor students there, so he needed to get out of there. He said that he understood her, because he would go to the library to study on his own anyway. He asked Ting, she wouldn't forget to leave a room for him, right? She said that of course she wouldn't forget. She said that they could continue their lesson now. After a while, she answered the phone. She asked who was calling her. One said after greeting her that it was bothering her. She thought, surprised, that it was the professor himself. Why was such an important person calling her? She asked after greeting him, how could she help him? He said that if it wasn't too much trouble, he politely asked her to tell student Bachin to come see him there. After all, he wanted to invite him to the project team. She said that of course she would tell everything right away and send him there. She asked loudly who student Bachin was. Ting said, raising her hand and turning to the teacher, that she had just kicked him out of there herself. She asked, looking shocked, how could this be? She thought, running out of the classroom, that she needed to fix the situation. After all, she had caused trouble for an important person. After a while, the protagonist was peacefully reading a book in the library. She said, turning to him and running in, that she had finally found him there. He asked formally, was the lesson over already? Why was she there now? She said, looking at him awkwardly, that she was apologizing to him for the way she had spoken to him there. He asked why she was apologizing. She said that the professor had personally invited him to participate in the Dichin project team. So if the professor had noticed him, then he must be a very important person, and she was blind and made a mistake. He asked what she was talking about. He didn't understand her at all. She said that he would recognize him when he went there. After all, his project was in the History Museum in the East. He let out a surprised sigh and continued reading the book. She asked if he didn't want to see it at all. He said, rubbing his neck, that she should let him finish studying the book first. She said that she understood everything, so there was no need to rush. Some time later in the hospital, one asked respectfully, what should they do now? Sean said that he knew the boss of that street there, so he would call him later and ask him to teach Baichin a lesson. The other said, grinning, that this was just a great idea. Then he said that he saw that man there right now. He said, picking up the phone, that it was just in time. After all, he would definitely beat him this time. He said, calling and saying hello, that he wanted to ask for his help in eliminating one guy. Chong asked, driving a moped, what his name was. He told him his name. He said that he understood everything and would do it. He said, turning to his people, that it was time to work. He said, speeding up hard and throwing off his people, that they needed to go there. Sometime later on the campus, Wu asked where the History Museum was there. Shan shouted, turning to him, he dared to steal 100,000 and just wants to run away? Does he really think he is allowed to mock him? He asked with a smile, did he really enjoy being beaten? He asked with a laugh, that he hit him once and now he thinks he is an important person? He said that he will explain to him out of the kindness of his heart about how he called the chief of this street there. So when he gets there, he will take care of him. Chong asked, arriving there, where is he now? Shan bowed to him with respect. He said, looking at the protagonist, it is he who is standing there. Chong stared in shock and opened his mouth in amazement. He thought, why is he there? He almost got beaten by him last time. If he messes with him again, he will definitely die. Is Shan trying to kill him? The protagonist asked with a smile, it is he who should take care of him, right? He said, turning to Chong, that he is too rough with him, so he should beat him up. He said angrily, giving a slap in the face, that he better shut up. He asked, looking at him in surprise, why did he hit him? He said, bowing to the protagonist, that he was asking for his forgiveness. After all, he had been deceived, so if he were so kind, he would forgive his misdeed. Shan stared in surprise. He said, turning to Shan, that he should immediately kneel down and apologize right now. How dare he quarrel with him? He thought, why is this happening there now? Is he really that afraid of him? So this Baichin is the secret head of the street? Wu asked, if he was refused help, then why didn't he do something himself? He said, falling to his knees, that he was apologizing to him and admitting his guilt. The protagonist asked how he dared to threaten him after he forgave him last time? Was he really tired of living? He said fearfully that he was asking for forgiveness for this. If he were so kind, he would forgive him. He asked how much he was going to pay him for moral damages. He asked, crying, did he want compensation for moral damage? He asked, did he really not want to pay? After all, then he would not be nice anymore. He said that he needed to wait, because he would give him 100,000 in money. He said, handing it to him, that it was his, so he could take it. He thought, laughing, that this was very easy money for him. He said, smiling, that he did not mind at all if he came to him again. He said, kneeling, that he had no more money left. The unknown man in the shadows thought that this guy had a few tricks, but nothing more. The protagonist thought that it was rather strange, because someone broke his trap, which he set in a mountain villa in a cloudy fog. Apparently, the master's wife was in danger. The protagonist, using his abilities, hurried back to the villa. The guy called on the phone and said that this guy had already left from there. After some time, in the mountain villa, the protagonist hovered in the air and said that there was still a faint deadly aura there, but it was no longer effective. He asked, using his abilities, who could have done that there. Using his detection skills, he noticed a group of people inside the building, as well as another group approaching him from the other side. He said with a smile that this was already interesting. Alan shouted that he was the one they needed, so they should surround him. The opponents surrounded the protagonist, who calmly looked at them. He said with a smile that he had enough courage to appear there. After all, he destroyed the formation that his master had set up. How dare he return there? It turns out that he does not take his master seriously at all. He asked angrily, "Let him tell you why he destroyed the formation?" He asked with his hands raised, "Why did he break it?" He got angry and clenched his fist tightly. He shouted, hitting his opponent, that he is not worthy of knowing this. He shouted, taking out his weapon, that they all needed to get out of there if they didn't want to die there. He dropped his weapon and shouted, flying away from there and insulting them, that with their low level of power, they had no right to even look at him. Alan asked angrily, sitting on the ground, why were they just standing there and doing nothing? Let them grab him immediately. They shouted, going in pursuit, that they understood the order. He thought that there was another group there, but they weren't moving, which meant they were on different sides. How funny! The man with the watch said that this guy was approaching them, so everyone should be ready to surround him. One said that he understood his order. He said that this time it didn't matter how, but he had to get the 2 books back. The other said that he was already approaching them. He said that they needed to act on his signal. Wu thought, grinning, that finally everyone was there, then it was time for them to play. He shouted, landing next to the other group, when will they show themselves? After all, he is being followed, so stop them. Alan thought, angry, does he have reinforcements? The man with the watch thought, cursing, that he brought so many people there with him. He said, jumping down from the tree, that it does not matter at all, they just need to kill everyone there. The protagonist chuckled, watching the spectacle. Both groups began to fight to the death there. Alan shouted, raising his hand to strike and cursing, that he must get out of his way. The man blocked the blow with his watch. The protagonist was enjoying the battle while eating an apple. He said with a smile that they should fight for him to the death. After a while, the man with the watch sighed heavily from fatigue. Alan said tiredly that this guy is so strong. The protagonist asked, flying up to them, have they finished fighting already? Maybe they need his help. Alan asked angrily, is it him? The man with the watch shouted, he dared to go back there. Isn't he afraid of how he can die at his hands? He asked, isn't he there too to protect him? He asked why he needs to protect him? After all, he wants to kill him as soon as possible. He said angry that they were deceived. He asked laughingly why people always rely on their own strength and never think first. It was too easy for him to deceive them. He asked how dare he say such a thing? The man with the watch said that he decided to set them against each other to mock them. He asked, making a rude hand gesture, was this really the only thing that had occurred to them? They must be complete idiots. He shouted as he attacked him, that he was going to kill him now. He asked, dodging the attack, why did he dare to show him such arrogance with his mediocre skills? He kicked his opponent, who flew away from there. Alan said in surprise that he had such incredible power. The man stood up and said, cursing, that he thought he was not strong enough to kill so many of his men. But it turns out that he really does have the ability. He said, smiling, that fighting them one by one was very boring for him. So let them attack him both at once. Alan said, gripping his weapon tighter, that he shouldn't be so impudent. He shouted, using his skill, that he alone was enough to kill him. He said that it was not a bad blow at all, although it just looked impressive. For a moment, it seemed that the blow hit the main character. He smiled happily at his victory. But suddenly he said that he apologized to him, but such weak blows are useless against him. The protagonist dealt a strong blow to the opponent's head with a flick of his finger. The man asked in surprise, how is this possible? He said, turning to him, that it is now his turn to die. He thought that this guy is too crazy. The protagonist said, catching up with his opponent, that he will not let him escape today. He hit his enemy with a weapon and asked, is he trying to escape from him? He said, looking at the body, that he needs to train better in the next life. He left the battlefield using his ability. Sometime later, at the location of the Qin project team at Haizhou University, Chio said, holding a vase in her hands, that it has been a long time since someone joined the project team last time. So she is curious about what this new member will be like. Xiaoru said, wishing her a good morning, that she is glad to see big sister there. She asked with a smile, is everyone already there? After all, there was a new member joining them today, so she called everyone to meet him. She asked, where is the new guy now? She said thoughtfully, he still hasn't arrived there. The male lead asked after saying hello, is this the Qin project team? She asked in surprise, isn't this the new guy in the class? She said while standing up, it really is the Qin project team. She asked as she walked up to him, so he is their new member, right? He said after introducing himself, that she was absolutely right. She thought he was so handsome. If he joined the team, it would be really great. Shinchi thought that Shiro was interested in the new guy. He needed to calm down. After all, he couldn't be too straightforward and needed to keep his distance. However, he needed to teach the new guy a lesson. He asked, "Where is the professor now?" She said that he had an important meeting today, so he couldn't come there. He thought, throwing it into the protagonist's pocket, that there would be an interesting show soon. The protagonist noticed that there was something in his pocket. She shouted, calling the guards, that something had been stolen from there. So they had to hurry and find it. The guard asked, looking angrily, who dared to steal from there? He said, pointing at the protagonist, that it was definitely him. He thought that this is how it happens. He planted something on him to frame him. She asked, turning to him, did he really take something? He said that he didn't take anything from there. She said that he saw it with his own eyes. After all, he stole the Sueho pearl, which he put in his right pocket. He said, smiling, that if this is true, then let them search him. The guard said that we need to find it and return it to its place. Another guard checked the protagonist's pockets and said that he had nothing. He asked in surprise, how was that possible? He said with a smile that we should search him now. After all, he said about stealing to cover up his own crime. She stared at the protagonist in surprise. After a while, Shinchi walked up to the protagonist and shouted at him not to dare slander him. He is the senior member of this team. How could he steal something from there? Another said that he should not be so nervous if he was so sure, just let the guards look at him, and they will see. Shinchi said that if it is that simple, let them search him. What does he have to be afraid of? The guard walked up to him and asked him to spread his arms. The other thought that something crazy was going on there. He definitely put the Sueho pearl in this guy's pocket. How could they not find it? The guard examined and probed every pocket, after which he found the pearls and shouted that this was it. Shinchi was very surprised by this, and shouted that it couldn't be like this. Chio said to him that she really framed someone while she was a crow. She really overestimated him. He continued to panic and said that this couldn't be true. He got angry and said that he definitely planted this pearl on Baichin. But for some reason, it ended up in his pocket. The protagonist thought, with such an intelligence, he dared to go against him? He remembered and produced in his mind how he was able to outsmart him. Chio displeasedly said that even if he didn't steal, framing someone else was still not a serious decision. Their project work does not tolerate a person with a questionable character. He should be fired. The guards dragged Shinchi out of the room while he said with displeasure that she shouldn't do this, she should give him a chance to start over. The guard said that he had the right to remain silent, so he should go with them. Wu said with a serious face that what goes around comes around. Chio turned to him and said with a smile that she was very sorry that he had to go through this on his first day. She apologized on behalf of the entire project team. He said that everything was fine, the most important thing was that the truth had come out. She asked what he would say. Maybe they should have a joint dinner with his colleagues in his honor, and as an apology? He smiled and said that he would be honored. After a while, there were happy shouts from the local bar. The entire team clinked their glasses and shouted that they should drink to this. Wu drank the beer to the bottom and said with a satisfied face that he felt very refreshed. Chio asked, despite such a choice, why did he choose barbecue? He said that there was nothing special, just some business with acquaintances. Ting brought their food and said that their dishes were ready. The protagonist asked when she would let him see the house. She asked him again with a smile. He asked why wait another day when they could do it tonight. She happily agreed with him. Shiro looked at them sadly and wondered what was going on between them. She felt like they were hiding something between themselves. Wu stood up from his seat and said that he should leave now. He needed to take care of something, but they could continue eating. Chio winked at him and said that it was okay, they understood. He grabbed Ting's hand and said that they should go to her place right away. She looked at him with confusion and just walked. The two girls standing next to their table started to discuss that there was definitely something between them. The other one laughed and said that they looked so good together. Xiaoru sat sadly and exhaled. After a while, Ting and Wu were standing in the house. She opened the windows and showed him the beautiful view. He smiled and said that it was quite nice, he liked the view from there. She said that the rent was not that high, only 500 yuan a month. He handed over the card and said that there was 10,000 yuan in there, let her take it. He would pay the rest when he moved in. She looked at him in surprise and asked, is he giving so much at once? He looked out the window happily and said that he planned to rent this house for a long time, so it was not much. She said that everything should be fine then, They would sort out all the details later. And they should go to bed early, she should leave at this point. He said goodbye to her and waved his hand. She left that apartment. After a while, the main character's hand began to wrap around spiritual energy. He said in surprise that the spiritual energy there was really very strong, it even penetrated inside. He began to levitate in the air and gathered a ball of spiritual energy between his hands. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound on the street and jumped out of the window. On the street, he saw a lion and asked, "Is this the Lion King? What is he doing?" Opposite the animal stood a white creature that resembled a wolf. The protagonist tried to find the words and asked, "Is this a spiritual animal?" Suddenly, the wolf attacked the Lion King. Wu happily ran to attack the creature and said that now he understood everything. Now it was no surprise to him that there was such dense spiritual energy. He delivered a very powerful blow to the asphalt, causing it to split. He turned around and noticed a huge mouth, after which he grabbed and held the mouth of the creature tightly. After a short time, he kicked the wolf, causing it to fly several meters away. He sternly looked at the lying wolf. After some time, the creature looked at the protagonist questioningly and fearfully. He attacked the wolf with his fist and screamed for it to die. He used his magic blow, causing the creature to dissolve and turn into spiritual energy, which flew towards him. Wu ate this spiritual energy and ascended. At that moment, a dog ran up to him and began to bark. He looked at the dog and asked, was it not happy that its prey was killed by him? The dog barked and jumped into the trash with a joyful look. The dog began to happily rummage and search for something. Wu looked at the dog and asked, "What does this beast want to do in the trash?" Suddenly he felt, then he came closer and said that this is a spiritual vein. He smiled and said that he did not expect to find a spiritual vein there, so it is no wonder that there are spiritual beasts and such strong spiritual energy. Feng Shui Treasure Land, this is a great time to start cultivating. In front of him was a book that was turning over the pages. He said that now he can cultivate the technique of glances for 1,000 miles. He used his ability and concentrated on the main thing. Suddenly he noticed something. His vision began to fly rapidly and search for pictures. He said that his spiritual energy is so rich, the technique works perfectly. He saw the door, and after that he saw Ting naked by her bathtub. He immediately realized that something was wrong, so he was very embarrassed, and his nose started bleeding. He asked all the gods to forgive him for this act. After a while, when the sun was shining outside, there was an ambulance outside Ting's house. Wu went down to the street and said, it was quite noisy outside for such an early hour. He should go and find out what was going on. He saw Ting taking care of her mother and asking her to get up so that she would not scare her daughter. The paramedic loaded the stretcher into the car and said that there was no room for her in the car, so she could call a taxi to the hospital. Ting was very worried and watched as the car door closed. After a while, the ambulance left for the hospital, and the protagonist came out from around the corner. He approached her and asked what happened. She cried and said that her mother suddenly became ill and was taken to the hospital. He asked what happened to her. They should go to her quickly. At this moment, the doctors in the hospital were worried about her mother's health. One of the doctors stood in a mask and said that it was useless, she could no longer be saved. Another said that her illness, accompanied by both internal and external problems. They had never seen such a phenomenon. Even if the divine doctor came, he would not be able to save her, they just had to return her to her family. At this moment, the main characters, along with Ting, entered the operating room and shouted for all the doctors to stop. She cried very hard and ran to her mother on the couch. She screamed, "Is her mother okay?" The doctors began to worry about what was happening. She pounced on one of the doctors, telling the doctor to save her mother, and she was her whole family, what was left. The doctor replied that her mother's illness was very rare, so everything was much more complicated. Wu said that the internal cold and external heat were a lack of yang energy in the lungs and an excess of yin energy in the dantian. This condition was indeed rare, but he had a way to cure it. He took the patient's hand and waited. The doctor ran up to him and asked, "Is this fool? Does he doubt medical skills?" The other replied that this was not true at all, he was just stating a fact. The doctor asked him to tell him what school he attended and who his teacher was. Wu replied that he was self-taught. The doctor asked, "What kind of a psychopath is this? He is self-taught and dares to speak so boldly. Isn't he afraid of paying for his words?" Ting silently watched their dialogue next to her mother. The doctor said that this young man left because he was not welcome there. He smiled and asked, "They don't believe in him, But there is a human life hanging by a thread, what if he just tries? The doctor strongly advised him to stop. The other one asked, does he really believe him? The doctor said that he doesn't believe at all, he wants him to give up. This guy, he can let him treat her, but he needs an agreement from her family. And if the treatment doesn't help, he must take responsibility. Does he agree to such conditions? The protagonist said that he agrees to everything. The doctor said that if he could really cure this woman, he would eat his hat. The other doctor said that he would do the same. After a few minutes, the doctor asked the girl as a family member if she would agree to let him cure her mother. She was speechless and kept silent. Wu told her to trust him, he could save her mother. She cried and said that she would agree to anything. She thought that her mother's condition was now critical, so they had no choice but to resort to the last resort. The doctor said that he asked him to begin then. Wu threw the parchment into the sky and screamed for them to watch and learn from him. He took out some needles from his parchment. He thought that he was inserting the needles into the woman's acupuncture points. And then he would simply inject spiritual energy. He would connect the meridians and align the yin and yang with the spiritual energy. The woman opened her eyes, and then she arched her back and spat out blood. Ting grabbed her mother's hand and screamed, "Is she okay?" The doctor walked up to the protagonist and said that he had gone too far. He just killed this woman, he better get ready to go to jail. He walked away from him and asked who said that he had killed someone. The doctor pointed his finger at the woman and told him not to try to deny it, let him see for himself. The woman opened her eyes and looked at her daughter. The other one screamed, "Is her mother awake? Is she feeling better? How is she feeling?" The woman looked at her crying daughter and said that she was feeling much better, but she still couldn't stop coughing. Wu smiled and said that his treatment was over and that she would be fully recovered within half an hour. The doctor looked at him doubtfully and asked who the hell he was. He smiled and said that he was an ordinary student. The doctors became nervous and remained silent. After a while, the doctor wiped his forehead and said that they really were apologizing to him, they didn't realize his skills. He looked at them and said that they didn't need to apologize, they should just keep their eyes peeled next time. The doctors agreed with him, feeling ashamed. The woman asked who that was. Ting said, leaning towards her, that it was her classmate. It was thanks to him that she was now saved. The other one said that she understood everything, then she thanked him from the bottom of her heart for that. Ting said that he had helped her so much, she didn't even know how to repay him. He said that he already knew what to do, they should go to her house. She asked why they should do that. He laughed and said that she would find out later. After a while, they were sitting in her apartment. Wu was eating a lot of different delicious food and putting the empty ones next to him. Ting looked at him with interest and was silent. He shouted that he was finally full. She asked, confused, was the payment he was talking about just to prepare this whole table of food? He got up from the table and agreed with her. She said that it was very simple. He started to leave the apartment and said that everything was fine, he had eaten his fill, now he should go back to his room, and she should rest. She wished him good night and stood dejectedly by the dirty dishes. After a while, she smiled happily and thought that this mister was such a good man, it would be nice if he could marry her. After a while, the protagonist was sitting in his room and thought that the cultivation there was really twice as effective. He should speed up his cultivation, move to the next level as soon as possible. Suddenly, he began to hear barking next to him. He pretended not to notice anything. Suddenly, a dog began to sneak into his apartment, but he noticed it and went to the window. He angrily ordered the dog and asked what it was doing there. The dog continued to bark. He asked, "Does this mean that someone in the estate wants to harm his mistress? Can this be?" The dog continued to bark. Wu angrily said that someone dared to plot against the teacher's wife. Whoever it was, they should all die. He jumped out of the window with the dog and flew together to the construction site next to their house. At this moment, Wang was standing in the yard with Shui. She said that, fortunately, they warned them in advance and asked Song to lead everyone out of the estate. Otherwise, the family would also suffer great losses due to this sudden explosion. The other one said that they were being too kind to him. He had been a good friend of the old master for many years. How could he allow himself to watch this family suffer? Dark red energies formed around him, after which he said that, however, the Yin Foam pharmacy of this place was accidentally destroyed by fire, and his years of hard work had been wasted. If he wanted to continue to prolong the life of the old master, he must use psychic means and rebuild them. She said that he should just tell them what they needed to do, as long as it was to save his father's life, their family was willing to pay any price. He smiled and said that he didn't need anything, he just needed a drop of this woman's heart blood. She asked him again with fear in her eyes. He said that the so-called heart blood was the blood of the heart, but she should not worry, he would use his Taoist techniques to extract it without surgery. She said that it was quite good, as long as it saved his father's life, she was willing to bear it. He bowed to her and said that she should wait for him there then, they would go inside to get her heart's blood. At this moment, there were 2 of his disciples left in the courtyard of this manor. One said that this woman was so easy to fool, she was deceived by the master with just a few words, and she really thought that he could live on after such a thing. She would really give up her heart's blood for this. The other said that it was very good, they should hurry up and tidy up the formation, let him not ruin the master's work. The first one looked at the leaf and said that his elder brother didn't have to worry, he had mastered the yin phone formation, and he could set it up quickly. He launched this leaf and used his ability. The leaf flew straight to the center of the manor, and developed dark energy. A lot of strong aura started flying around it. Lightning flashed from the sky and struck next to him. He looked into the air and asked what was this strange celestial disturbance. At this moment, the protagonist arrived at the place and said that he finally got there. The first brother saw the Lion King in the sky. The second brother said that his elder brother should see, there is an animal flying in the sky on a sword. The second brother said that it is not so, it is not just a creature, but the Lion King. The dog began to bark loudly. They shouted that the dog that is flying in the sky. The protagonist was not far from that place. He said that someone had restored the yin phone formation here, now he understands why the Lion King called out like that. The first brother shouted that they had encountered Isekai, so it will be interesting. But they did not use their abilities, after which the second brother shouted that they cannot allow this creature to destroy the yin phone formation. They must kill it now. They launched their dark energy ability at the protagonist and the dog. At this moment, Wu took the sword from his feet and said that they are just apostates. The dog realized that there was nothing under its feet anymore. The protagonist cut through all the dark energy in its path. The brothers shouted that they should quickly run away and get out of his way. The other one delivered his own blow, causing the brothers to fly in different directions and start coughing. He walked up to them and said that so they were the ones who set up the yin phone formation, weren't they afraid of interrupting their life cycle? The dog continued barking at them. One of the brothers said that they were deceived, this kid wasn't a monster. The second brother replied that it would be better if it was a prank, he almost scared him. They grabbed the flag and shouted, this guy wants to stop them from setting up the formation? He's definitely just some trash who only knows how to scare people. They should kill him. The protagonist looked at them calmly and thought that their cultivation was so shallow. They didn't look like they could set up the yin phone formation. Could it be that there is someone else? One of the brothers used his ability and charged his weapon with fire. Then he told his brother that they should use the Tong Yin array to confront this person. The other brother agreed with him and shouted that the demonic spells of the heavenly heart, killing without form, disturbing the mind, depriving the presence of spirit. The array has already been activated. A powerful pillar of energy formed towards him. Runes that attracted lightning were formed on their battlefield. The brother with the weapon said that the demon god should appear and help him kill this god. Suddenly, an incarnation of a demonic form appeared next to him. Wu looked at it and said that he was curious, there are still people who are related to the demon lineage. The brother with the weapon ran towards him and shouted that he must not talk nonsense. He must die. He attacked him first, and the protagonist gathered air and blew him out of the way. The other shouted that this is absolutely impossible. The protagonist ran at him with an angry face and said that with such abilities, they should not have bothered to use this evil at all. He grabbed him by the throat and said that this time he started to do something outrageous, only then will he be able to do what is right. He began to strangle him and threw him to the floor. The second brother looked at this and began to panic. The first brother said that their opponent was too strong, so he should run away. The second brother of the strong panicked and began to move towards retreat. He said that he would go and find the teacher, so that the master would avenge them. Wu appeared in front of his body and asked, "Do they have a teacher?" The second brother noticed this, and realized that his opponent was using shadow steps. The protagonist managed to grab him by the throat and asked him, let him tell him where their teacher is. Was it he who told them to set up this formation? The second brother grabbed his hand in the air and said that the great immortal should visit him, then he will tell him everything. His teacher is inside the manor, and he is the one who instructed them to set up the formation. He asked who their teacher was? After a while, the second brother told him that he was originally a great master from Longhu Mountain, but he was expelled due to violating the rules. He had a corrupt moral character, with a demonic heart. Their mountain does not accept disciples like him, so he was expelled. Later, he founded his own sect and recruited many disciples. Many years ago, he accidentally found out that this manor was supported by clouds and fog, and realized that there was a treasure underneath it. However, it took at least 1,000 years for the treasure to appear. In order to speed up the process of the treasure's appearance, the teacher devised a plan. The plan prompted the old master to buy this empty building on Yunwu Mountain, rebuilding it into a manor. He also secretly created the Yin Foam formation to absorb the energy of the people living there to speed up the process of the treasure's appearance. The protagonist looked at it carefully, and thought that everything was now clear to him as it was. The second brother bowed before him and said that he had told him everything, let him spare him. The other asked, should he spare him? An evil cultivator only deserves death. He used his ability, and charged a strong energy in his hand, after which he used soul dispersion. He walked away from the brothers and said that his master's wife was in danger, he should quickly find her. After a while, he walked around the manor and thought that if he went like this, his cultivation would be exposed, he should hide it. At this moment, in the manor house, Wang told Shui that she was ready, he should proceed and take her heart blood. He walked up to her, and said that he would do it carefully now. She saw the weapon in his hands and asked what he was going to do with this blade. He said that of course he would take the heart blood. She screamed in panic that he promised her not to harm her body, that he would not cut the flesh. Had he lied to her? He pointed the weapon at her and screamed, did she just now realize it? But it was too late. The weapon was already close to her head and she started screaming for help. At this moment, the protagonist stopped Shui's hand. He punched him in the face with his fist, causing him to fly into the wall and fall. The protagonist said that he should not harm innocent women in broad daylight. He is shameless. Wang was very surprised by his appearance. Wu was pleased with himself, and thought that this outfit was just like in the show. His teacher's wife would definitely not recognize him. Shui stood up and shouted, holding a paper in his hands, what kind of little brat is this? With what kind of weak cultivation does he want to show off in front of him? He only deserves to die. After that, he threw the paper at the protagonist, causing a spirit to appear in the air. The protagonist took a fighting stance and said that as a cultivator, he sold out to evil and went against the will of heaven. He punched the spirit and knocked it down. He shouted that he deserved to be punished. The other panicked and asked, how is this possible? This is the evil spirit that he has cultivated for many years, and he killed it in an instant? Wu ran at him and asked what he was waiting for. The other one put his hands in a certain position and activated his ability. He said with bared teeth that he is not so easily scared. After that, a shield appeared in front of him, which the protagonist struck. He said that this is not bad, but he has a few tricks. Shui shouted that the evil spirit must listen to his command. The evil spirit is his strongest trump card, he must see how he can stop it. At this moment, several evil spirits were created in the air and flew towards the protagonist with their attacks. Wu used his ability and said that thousands of gods and saints must help him and protect his true spirit. Blue chains flew from his body, which shackled all the evil spirits and disabled them. Shui screamed evilly, he has such a strong cultivation, who is he? The main character swung the chain at him and shouted that he was his father. The other one got very angry and tried to run away from him from the window. Wu got upset and asked, does he want to run away from him? They will see how easy he can get away. After a while, Shui ran across the field and said that, fortunately, he runs fast, he began, he could really get up this time. Someone flew into the leaves. And suddenly a dog attacked him and began to bark. Shui was very scared that the dog bit him in the shoulder and stood on his body. The main character ran up to them and asked, the Lion King was called a dead dog, why doesn't this one quickly deal with him? The dog began to bark even more viciously and killed him. Wu stroked the dog and said that it was very smart, let it follow him, and everything will be fine. The dog gave a sign of agreement. After a while, the protagonist said that it was very bad that the teacher's wife was chasing them from under the reinforcements. They should leave there. At that moment, they disappeared from that field, and the bodyguards ran to the corpse and started shouting that they should quickly pick it up. Wang came to him and said that the master was killed by some mysterious person. If they were lucky again, she would definitely thank him. The protagonist flew on his sword dog and said that he had used up a lot of spiritual energy, The queen should go back and replenish it together. They flew to their home. After a while, they arrived at the area. Wu said that he would cultivate there for a while, and the dog should sit and protect him. When he finished, he would give it spiritual energy as a reward. Suddenly, Mr. Hua's bodyguard touched his shoulder. He said that he was not allowed to be there. The protagonist turned around and did not understand what was happening at all. He asked, "Who are they? Why can't they be there?" The bodyguards introduced themselves and said that their master was currently practicing his fist technique, and no one had the right to distract him. In front of them, the master was practicing and not bothering anyone. Wu exhaled and asked, "And they call this training in fist technique? At best, it's just a warm-up." The bodyguard swung at him and shouted, "How dare he insult his elders? He deserves to die." Their master walked up to them and shouted at them to stop. They all turned their attention to him and froze. The man, turning to the elder, exclaimed indignantly, "He just now." The elder, calmly looking at him, interrupted and said that he knew. Then he turned to the protagonist and asked, "He just said that his fist technique was just a warm-up. What did he mean?" Wu, turning his gaze to the elder, replied that although his technique has grace, it lacks a few moves to reveal its full power. It's like a dish without salt, it looks delicious but tastes bad. The elder, indignant, furrowed his brows and said that this technique has been passed down from generation to generation, and he will not tolerate slander against it. He must provide evidence, otherwise he will not let it go. The protagonist suggested that how about he help him perfect this fist technique, and if he is satisfied, he will leave this place and let him use it. Deal? The elder replied, "Boy, he is really bold. If he can perfect this fist technique, not only will he give him this place, but he will also call him teacher." The protagonist then took a stance and said, "In that case, he will only show it once." He closed his eyes and concentrated, and then threw several punches in front of him, one of which broke through the trunk of a tree, causing it to fall. The elder exclaimed in surprise, "This is impossible. With the same fist technique, his punch is several times stronger than his punch." His subordinate gritted his teeth and frowned and said, "This guy is so strong." His colleague added, "It's good that they didn't start a fight, otherwise they would be in the place of this tree now." Then the protagonist shook his hands and said that was enough. The elder bowed to him with a smile and said, "Teacher, he is a true master." He then thanked him for his instructions and said that he had acted rashly. If he had offended him, please forgive him. Wu asked, "Can he leave this place now?" The elder pointed his hand forward and laughed and said, "Of course, he is a man of his word, this place is his now, please." The protagonist told him to take his men and leave, he needs some peace and quiet. The elder bowed again and agreed with a smile. He then turned to his subordinates and shouted, "Did they hear? They must leave this place." Everyone agreed with him. After a while, the protagonist sat down opposite the Lion King and said that he could guard it now. He barked in agreement. At this time, the elder told his subordinates to find out about the teacher's past for him after they returned. He wanted to know everything about him. The men looked at each other and agreed with him, saying that they were finding out right now. At this time, the protagonist closed his eyes, took a meditative pose and concentrated his energy, thinking, too many things happened recently. Why does it seem to him that now, 2,000 years later, everything is connected to the past? Auntie Zhou and his teacher's wife are so similar, and their auras are similar in some ways. Taoists and this mastery are also cultivators, which shows that cultivation still exists. Could this all be a coincidence? It seems he needs to know more. Then he called senior sister Chio. She answered the phone, and he said that he wanted to know if there was a place in the university where he could find out information about the time period of 2,000 years ago. She said that there was little information in the university, but recently the project team went to an archaeological excavation of a tomb, and there were rumors that the owner of the tomb was about 2,000 years old. If he was interested, he could come to see her tonight. He stood up and smiled and said, "Okay," he would come to see her tonight. After finishing the call, he looked at his phone and wondered, a 2,000-year-old tomb owner? I wonder if he would find the truth he was looking for there? Soon, he and the rest of the project team arrived at the entrance of the tomb. Turning to senior sister Chio, he asked, "Was this the tomb she was talking about?" She confirmed his words. Then he turned his attention to the guys standing behind them and asked, "Who are they? Are they also part of the project team?" She replied that they were not, and explained that they were bodyguards hired by the university to protect them. This tomb seemed a little strange to her, because the archaeological team that went in before them had not returned yet. That was why, for the sake of safety, they decided to hire bodyguards. Xiaoru and Qianqian were standing not far from them. Shiru's body was shaking. She clenched her fists and closed her eyes, saying, she knew she shouldn't come here, it was so scary. Xiaoju said, okay, stop talking nonsense, they should go down together. Soon, they were already walking through a stone cave. Qianqian, despite her fear, looked around and admired, wow, the tomb is so big inside. Xiaoru, still shaking with fear, asked, is this really a tomb? Even her house is not that big. Xiaoju, looking ahead, said that their mission now is to find the missing archaeological team and bring back valuable antiques for research at the university. At this moment, the protagonist suddenly felt someone's presence. He turned around abruptly, and Xiaoju, noticing this, looked at him and asked, classmate Yi, what happened? He replied, nothing, he was just a little dizzy. At this time, several people were watching them from behind the rocks. One of them, turning to his brother, said someone came in. They had already killed the previous archaeological team, but that did not stop them. His brother replied that the organization sent them to find treasures, and they cannot let them overtake them. Tonight, except for them, no one will come out alive. He then took out his weapon. Wu, sensing danger, covered Xiaoju with his hand and shouted for everyone to be careful, it's an ambush. He then took out the magic needles. The bandit was surprised and asked, that's strange, he missed? The guards from the research team were alert, pointed their guns forward and shouted, who's there? Xiaoru and Qinqin pressed themselves against Xiaoju. Qinqin closed her eyes and cried out in fear. A ghost! Xiaoju told them not to be afraid, it wasn't a ghost. The guards shouted at them to stop or they would shoot. One of the bandits sneered and said, give it a try! Then a shot rang out, followed by a cry that he deserved to die. The next moment, the bandit threw magic needles forward, which were pierced by the bullets that flew out. The guards clutched their eyes and cried out in pain. Qianqian and Xiaoru hugged each other and cried out in fear that they were in danger. One of the bandits adjusted his mask and turned to his older brother and asked, these three women look good, they haven't had fun in a long time, what do you think? His brother answered as he wished. He suggested that they each take one of them and enjoy their company before killing them. At this moment, the protagonist scratched his ear and asked, did they forget about him? One of the bandits turned around and thought that his presence was barely noticeable, and he almost forgot about him. Then his brother, turning to him again, said that this guy seemed weak. He suggested leaving him to him, since he had enough experience in such matters. With that, he threw the sphere forward, shouting for him to catch it. Wu clenched his fist and replied that it was brave, and then, hitting the sphere with his fist, said that such an attack was completely useless. However, the next moment, smoke poured out of the sphere. The bandit laughed and said, kid, he was tricked. The girls covered their mouths and started coughing nonstop, then fell unconscious to the ground. The protagonist waved his hand near his nose and said, so vile and disgusting. His opponent asked, is he okay? He replied with a smile, did they think that this weak smoke bomb could knock him down? The bandit took out his blade and exclaimed, damn, he is humiliating him. He quickly appeared next to Wu and shouted that he would kill him. Wu grabbed the blade with 2 fingers, and the blade broke. One of the bandits, watching what was happening, exclaimed in surprise, caught the blade with 2 fingers? And then counterattacked? His comrade shouted, damn, they underestimated him, he is not an ordinary person. Wu asked, so are they going to attack together or alone? The bandit looked at his brother and asked what should they do now. He replied that this kid has a few tricks, but he should not be afraid of him. He said that he still has a secret weapon. And with that, he showed off the lamp. The protagonist exclaimed in surprise, a soul-sealing lamp? The bandit, holding the lamp in his hand, said, it seems he knows a lot. If he knows the soul-sealing lamp, why doesn't he kneel down and beg for mercy? Wu only remained silent in response, and the bandit pointed his finger at him and said, hey, big brother, he seems scared. The protagonist looked below his opponent's waist. And the bandit said, kid, if he bows down at his feet right now, he will have a chance to save his life, otherwise. But before he could finish speaking, a powerful kick passed between his legs. He grabbed the injured place, his body shook, and he screamed in pain. Then he turned to his big brother and shouted, he dared to hit him. He deserves to die. Wu also shouted that he deserves to die. Then the lamp in the robber's hands lit up, releasing long magic chains from itself. The protagonist easily dodged the chains and said the lamp that captures the soul is good, he likes it. He pushed one of the chains away from himself and pointed it at the robber. He looked at it in horror and exclaimed, not good. The chain wrapped around his soul. His elder brother shouted in horror, "Younger brother!" The robber whose soul was under the chain exclaimed, "Older brother, he must save him, quickly!" The lamp landed on the ground, the robber leaned towards it, said, "Younger brother, he is changing in front of him, he did not want to." Then the protagonist took the lamp in his hand and, smiling, said that instead of repenting, he can join him. Magic chains flew out of the lamp again, capturing the robber's soul. At this moment, Wu noticed sounds from the side. After a while, Beichin grabbed Xiujia by the shoulders and carefully lifted her up. He said that he had brought a recovery pill, and after she swallowed it, she should wake up. Sure enough, her eyes soon opened. Shiru and Qi-Qin also came to their senses, holding their heads. Qi-Qin complained of a severe headache and asked what happened. Xiaoru was also feeling uncomfortable. Suddenly, Qi-Qin stood up and, seeing the corpses in front of her, screamed in horror. She hid behind the protagonist and pointed to the bodies, shouting that there were a lot of dead people here. The girls, looking at the corpses, trembled with fear. Xiujia turned to Beichin and asked, "Classmate Yi, what's going on?" He thought with an awkward smile, oh no, he forgot to deal with the corpses. What should he say? Then, awkwardly scratching his cheek, he said, after the bodyguards who protected them died, he picked up his gun and began to fight. Fortunately, he won. Xiujia smiled and gave him a thumbs up and said, "I get it, classmate Yi, he's really cool." Beichin awkwardly scratched the back of his head and smiled and said she was flattering him. He then looked to the side and said, by the way, he saw a strange wall. He touched the wall with his hand and said he didn't know what was behind this wall, but this place seemed enchanted to him. Suddenly, the slabs in front of him parted to the sides, revealing a passage. He looked forward seriously and asked, "What is this?" Xiujia clenched her fists and exclaimed happily, "This door leads to the main tomb." She then stepped forward and said, "Great, they should go in and see what's in there." As he walked inside, the protagonist thought that the spiritual energy inside was very rich. He wished there were cultivators like him here. They found themselves in a large room, in the center of which a sword was stuck into the ground, and around it, skeletons were sitting in a meditative pose. Xiujia asked, "What were these people doing here? Why were they all dead?" Then she looked at the sword and began to reach out to it. Beichin excitedly shouted for her to stop and not touch this sword. She looked at him in surprise. The next moment, magical energy pushed her aside, and the protagonist managed to catch her. At this time, Zhang Jiayun and his subordinates approached the tomb, but suddenly they saw sparkling lightning in front of them. She was surprised and asked, "The magical phenomenon of lightning?" The spiritual energy of the tomb became more saturated. Could it be that a treasure appeared here? Her younger brother, turning to her, said that they lost contact with the people they sent there. She asked in surprise, "What?" Then, running forward with determination, she shouted that one team should go with her into the tomb, and the rest should guard the entrance and not let anyone go. Everyone agreed with her. In the tomb, Beichin, holding Xiujia, asked if she was okay. Looking at him, she replied that she was fine and thanked him. Qin and her friend hid behind the protagonist, and she shouted, "There really are ghosts here. Help, it's so scary." The next moment, the skeletons stood up and began to glow. The protagonist, covering the girls with his hand, shouted, "Be careful. Everyone needs to hide behind him." One of the skeletons, holding a shield and sword in his hands, asked who dared to invade the master's domain. "They must get out." Beichin clenched his fists, preparing for a fight, and asked what their master's name was. The skeleton replied that they, the servants, could not name the master. Several skeletons ran towards the heroes and shouted, "Outsiders, they must die." The protagonist smirked, came to his senses and said, "How come? They don't want to talk, then they will fight." He then directed several attacks at the skeletons. Watching what was happening, Xiujia asked, "What's going on?" Shioru said in surprise, "Yi Beichin can use magic?" The skeleton fell to the ground and asked, "Who is he anyway?" The protagonist, holding a sword in his hand, said that who he was not important. What was more important was that they had angered him. He then swung the sword, sending out a burst of energy that cut the skeleton into several pieces. He then threw the sword and said that in order for a 1,000-year-old soul remnant to survive until today, they must suffer enough. After death, they can reincarnate, and they must do it correctly to avoid the suffering associated with guarding this place. The next moment, Xiujia walked up to him and, putting her hand on her chest, asked, "Who is he?" He smiled awkwardly and told her not to be afraid, he was a good guy. Suddenly, the sword that was hidden in the ground rose into the air, and lightning began to emanate from it in all directions. The protagonist, seeing this, asked, "Is this the thunder sword that contains lightning magic?" At this moment, they heard someone approaching. Jiayun, accompanied by her subordinates, ran to the right place and exclaimed with a smile, as she guessed, "The treasure is here." Shueijia looked at her and asked, "What kind of nonsense is this? Why is everything like in a movie?" Jiayun pointed her blade at Wu and said that they have long dreamed of this treasure. If he wants to live, he must hand over the thunder sword. He turned his gaze to her and asked mockingly, "Ah, another wave of idiots?" One of her subordinates shouted, "Big sister, this guy seems to have cultivated a little. Can he order the team to deal with him?" She glanced at him and then commanded, "Forward." Her subordinates quickly ran to attack. One of them jumped on the protagonist and shouted, "Kid, this is their territory, he must get out of here." Wu calmly dodged his blows, and at one point, he punched the attacker, sending him flying to the side. He then kicked his opponent, and shouted indignantly, "They want to take something from him." Jiayun, seeing her subordinates flying apart, opened her mouth in surprise and thought, "Who is this guy? He is so tough. It seems like he will have to use only his brain this time, there is no other way." She shouted at him to not move. Grabbing Shueijia and Xiaoru by the neck, and her subordinate pointed a blade at Shanqian's neck, Wu turned around and shouted, "What are they trying to do?" Jiayun narrowed her eyes and said with a smirk, "Kid, he killed her people, she does not hold a grudge against him. But that thunder sword behind him, it is hers. He should just obediently hand it over. Otherwise, his little friends will die." Xiaoru said desperately, "Beichen, she doesn't want to die, he has to save her." The protagonist raised his hands and said, "They want the thunder sword? Well, they can take it." Jiayun looked at her subordinates and ordered them to watch these women. They accepted her order, and then she pushed off the ground and grabbed the sword by the hilt, saying, "Great, the treasure is finally hers." Suddenly, the magic chains grabbed the souls of her subordinates, and they cried out in pleas for help. Wu looked at the girls and asked Shueijia if she was okay. She said she was fine. Jiayun, gritting her teeth angrily, shouted that she spared him, and he immediately dared to attack her people? He replied with a smile, "They are his enemies, who else should he fight?" She said, "Okay, she admits that he can resist her. But now she has the thunder sword in her hands, he is a corpse." She took a fighting stance, and several thunder dragons appeared behind her. She laughed, and the dragons flew forward at a rapid pace. She shouted that he was powerless against this power, "You idiot!" But the next moment, Wu created a wall in front of him using the ground beneath his feet. Jiayun shouted in surprise, "How is this possible?" The protagonist jumped up and approaching her, said that the thunder sword is a spiritual item. He offered to teach her how to use it. Swinging the sword, she shouted, "Damn, does he want to die?" She attacked in front of her, but then, her eyes widened in surprise, she said, "No good, this is an illusion." Wu appeared at her side and grabbed the sword by the blade with 2 fingers. Grinning, he asked, "What is she looking at?" "He is here." He then snatched the sword from her hands and told her to watch closely. A powerful blow fell on the ground next to her, and then the protagonist rose into the air, swung his sword several times, and sent energy pulses forward. He said, "This is how to use the thunder sword." She tried to cover herself with her hand and screamed in horror, "No," but the next moment, a cloud of rising dust covered her. Wu turned his attention to the sword and said that there was some kind of spell on it.